Buenos días a todos y todas. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas.
Good morning, everybody, and very welcome to this webinar. We were working very hard in the past months to have an active participation of very important people that have enlightened us. And today we are launching for Latin America and the Caribbean a new book called Fostering Peace in the Church and the World. And with the launching of this new book, the idea is to spread among faith people, theologians that are interested in promoting nonviolence in Latin America and the Caribbean from within our Catholic Church, our source of inspiration, but also we want to go to different spaces. We want to share this sense of ethics of the public spheres. The first objective of this seminar is to share this publication. And secondly, we want to present the dynamics and different expressions of non-violence. Thirdly, we want to give a chance to have a reflection, an open and candid reflection on the meaning of nonviolence within the Catholic Church and in general in the world and also in Latin America and the Caribbean. And fourthly, we would like to have a more in-depth discussion that has or that reaches specific objectives within the leadership, the Catholic leadership in Latin America and the Caribbean. And when I say leadership, I have to remember our past inspiring experiences. We want to promote active non-violence. This was incorporated among the 41 topics of including challenges that we want to work on. And it is very important now in our project of the church as the community of God. We want to distribute this book, and we are going to give you a code that will grant you a special discount if you want to get a copy of this book. We have a very luxurious panelists. So we are going to have the privilege to enjoy the presence of Bishop Mark Stenger, the co-president of Pax Christi International. He's going to enlighten us in a moment of spirituality. And then we will have a very dynamic conversation between three panelists, three people that have a high level of experience, both in theory and practice. Pietro Meglio and Francisco de Roo and Eva Reyes from Chile. And Marie Dennis will be also moderating this panel that will also have the presence of Pietro Ameglio from Mexico. So without further ado, let's listen to Bishop Mark Stenger, whose microphone is not on.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon to all of you and welcome to this webinar. At this occasion, we would like to have a reflection on the dynamics and multiple expressions of fair peace in the church and in the whole world. We want to have an exchange with theologists and analysts, experts, and with people of faith from the Latin American continent. In the run-up to Christmas, we would like to get closer to the mystery of incarnation. Through this mystery, God has put an end to a logic of violence, and he has done this through a message of peace and understanding among the people in communities. He has promoted a strategy based on non-violence in an effort to listen to the outcries of the planet and the most vulnerable ones, the Christmas message is sent to men and women of peace and justice. We need to make this message a reality, has to be true. And we want to focus on the victims of racism, discrimination, and hatred. We want to continue in our search of protection of everybody. And with this message, I would like to send my blessing, my message of peace and non-violence addressed to the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, the so-called the subcontinent of peace. Thank you. Thank you so much, dear Mark. It is a pleasure to have you among us, accompanies us at this very special moment. And I would like to introduce now Marie Denise. She's a very special person for Pax Christi International, because she is a personification of peace and justice. For many years, she's been the co-president of Pax Christi International. She has worked as a director of the Marine Office for Global Affairs, and today she's still very active, working in close cooperation with the Dicastery for Development, and she's leading the network of Catholic Initiative for Non-Violence, a Pax Christi International initiative that wants to create new narratives on the meaning of non-violence and building peace within the church. So welcome, Marie. You're going to present to us all the parcours of this book, and you're going to be the moderator.
Thank you. Apologies for speaking in English. Following the small conference in 2016, in which several of our speakers participated, that was co-sponsored by the Vatican and Pax Christi International. Pax Christi, our Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, continued a dialogue with many sectors of the church and began to see that even that dialogue, the conference, and the publication of the World Day of Peace message in 2017, that despite those major steps, there was still a need for a much deeper examination of nonviolence. We had learned so much from the speakers at our conference, whose experience of nonviolence around the world was already deepening our understanding of what nonviolence meant and how it could be applied. That richness of what we were learning, especially from local experiences in many different contexts, was a huge gift. We believed, and we were encouraged to follow that belief, that a deeper understanding of nonviolence was going to be really important if we were going to move nonviolence to the center of Catholic Church teaching on violence and war. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Just for a few images of the book that we're talking about. To deepen our understanding of the whole subject of nonviolence very deeply and broadly understood, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative invited theologians, peace practitioners, scholars, activists, members of Pax Christi International from around the world to participate in 5 roundtables, that each of which focused on one particular aspect of nonviolence in a very deep and broad way. The main topics of the roundtables were toward a theology, a systematic theology of nonviolence, a deeper fundamental scriptural exegesis of nonviolence, the development of a new or a broader, deeper ethical guide based on nonviolence for action in the public arena. We asked one roundtable to gather very specific examples of nonviolence applied in different, very violent and difficult contexts. And we had a fifth roundtable that was developing examples of what it would mean if the Catholic Church actually integrated nonviolence into all sectors of the church and all of the channels of communication and education in the church. So the systematic theology of nonviolence, scriptural exegesis of nonviolence, a new moral framework for addressing the violences of our world, the integration of nonviolence into every sector, factor of the church, and examples, case studies of powerful, the application of nonviolence. The book that we are presenting this morning was the fruit of those roundtables. Many in the roundtables did not necessarily agree with each other as they stepped into the conversation, and that was intentional. After the conference in 2016, we had heard a number of objections to moving nonviolence to the center of Catholic teaching on violence and war. And we wanted to listen with careful attention to those objectives and objections. And so we did invite many people with many different perspectives to participate in the roundtables. And the fruit of those conversations was very rich. And it was from the roundtables that the book was subsequently developed. The book emphasizes, for example, providing resources, biblical, theological, ethical, pastoral, and strategic resources and examples. The book emphasizes a number of facts about nonviolence and many more that we'll explore this morning. One is that nonviolence is a fundamental value based on the gospel and on the life of Jesus, that it is in many ways constitutive to the life of faith, that nonviolence is a spirituality, a way of life, a global ethic, and a spectrum of often effective strategies for preventing violence, interrupting violence, promoting a more just and sustainable peace. And that nonviolence is a fundamental basis for a culture of peace and a set of very powerful tools for building that just peace. So as we move into our conversation this morning, you will hear more about how the concept of nonviolence can be moved in different contexts, in different cultures, to a more central place in Catholic thought. Our objective beginning in 2015, 2016, was to deepen Catholic understanding of nonviolence and commitment to nonviolence. This book, we hope, is a contribution in that direction. So again, welcome to our speakers. You have all received one guiding question that we hope you will incorporate into your sharing with us this morning. And that the question was, in your countries and in Latin America and the Caribbean, how successful are efforts to move the principles and practices of nonviolence to the center of Catholic thought on war and violence, in place perhaps of the just war tradition? Thank you.
Excelente. Muchísimas gracias, Marie. Queremos recordarles que tenemos interpretación.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marie. We remind you that we have interpretation. You can select your language at the lower part of the screen by just clicking on your language. Some of us had the big privilege to participate in some of those round tables, and this was a very constructive process of reflection, debate, and I'm sure Pietro will dwell upon this a bit further. But first of all, I would like to introduce you to Father Francisco de Rú from Colombia. He used to be a Jesuit, he's a philosopher, an economist. He was subdirector of the Research Center and Popular Education Cine, director of the Program for Peace of Compañía de Jesús, director of Cine in 2008. He also was working for this community in Colombia, and he created the first peace laboratory in Colombia, following an articulation model with church, companies, the local governments, and social organizations. He has worked as a mediator in many spaces where he has managed to sit around the same table people that used to be opposed with each other. In June 2017, after a long process of exchange, he helped in the armed conflict resolution. He managed to accompany the peace talks. He has written many books, including Los Precios de la Paz, and recently La Audacia de la Paz Imperfecta, and currently Father Francisco is the president of the Commission to clarify the truth, coexistence, and non-repetition. This is one of the spaces created within the new transition after the peace agreements. Francisco de Rú, you're welcome. You are in your house, and thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. Thank you very much, Marta. Can you hear me? Yes, very well. Thank you, Marta.
Courage and clarity. Y saludos a Pietro y a Eva, con quien me siento muy complacido de poder compartir este
I am
rato.
pleased to share this moment with you. Many times since my experience in Colombia, they ask me whether is it possible to do even more in this project of church as the people of God to make sure that non-violence, being it an inspiration, occupies the core of the social cohesion.
Les hablo de la situación que he vivido en Colombia.
Well,
Miren,
we have been living a very difficult situation in Colombia. This is very clear. And it's also clear that the church, the Catholic Church, and in general Christian Church did vote in as a majority in favor of peace, because this is essential. So the churches didn't want to be manipulated by political parties. So we had the populist guerrilla, and in the way things were being proposed, well, this meant leaving also Colombia in the hands of the communism from Venezuela, for example. This would have destroyed Catholic and Christian families because they would impose specific laws, imposing abortion, for example. So all these were false threats. And the church in the past, well, was listening to Catholic journalists, Catholic businessmen, Catholic politicians, and they abused this confidence of the church. So at the same time, we had bishops and fathers that did defend dialogue. Unfortunately, an important majority was against and defending the so-called just war. So this has been a very important task, the just war in Colombia with a Catholic forces. Well, this has gone against us, and we see that Colombians, well, have wanted to reflect in a different way, but at the beginning, everyone was taking up arms. The violence had an important impact on the indigenous people, on women, on children, on Black population. So it has been very difficult. The lack of understanding of the essence of nonviolence of the gospel. So the church as a whole, again, although we have beautiful expressions that are contrary to what I'm going to say right now, but the church as a whole, those that had been baptized, to say it in a different way, unfortunately, we have shown lack of confidence, and in general, well, we see that we're talking more than 90% of the population that is baptized. And we have shown no mercy. And us, all of us that are baptized, we have seen on television at the beginning of the news all these killings, children that had died due to the mines. We have also seen all these people that have disappeared. And well, we were just accepting this. And at the same time, there was the propaganda of join the good war with the Colombian army. And the businessmen could see their business still flourish, and Catholic businessmen continue doing their business. And also, we saw farmers, Catholic farmers still working, and Catholic priests celebrating mass. And it's terrible. And then all the different discourse that were moralist also in the mouth of priests, and at the same time hate everywhere, and armed solutions and pointing fingers. So this was very difficult, something that was considered in this book when it was said, when there's rivalry between brothers and sisters, this just tears them up. When we're talking about war between brothers and sisters, no, no mass, just go out and create peace, because this is what was required, reconciliation and peace, not something that is going to just have us close our eyes in the face of reality. And then Pope Francis came to visit us, and one day he devoted just one day to the victims, just to them. And when he spoke with bishops and with priests in Medellin, he said, stop pretending that with a moralist preaching and just with mass, you're going to be able to transform the reality. No, you need to help the people. You need to be next to the victims covered in blood. You need to do something about this. So cannot you cannot defend those that are at war. So church in general, the church our church has defended amongst rich Catholics, and we have seen also rich farmers. They were protecting their security that we have here and in Latin America, which is security to protect our property and to have more security and safety for our own property, for our own power, and also to have the most important prestige. And we have left behind people in an easier way without arms. How can we protect human beings when there's all these money and all this power and all this prestige that we are seeking? So unfortunately, bishops, also religious communities, well, we have become sort of part of the club of the rich and powerful, and we are trying to protect their prestige in a way. So we need to be aware of this. It's sad, isn't it? We are telling the gospel. We are talking about the humble child that will be born soon, but at the same time, there's this richness everywhere, and all the power, and all this required armed security, and we're asking for money. Well, shouldn't we rather give a little bit of our time to the poor? And we are accepting these friends that are protecting this violence. We open our arms to them. In Colombia, for example, we're in the presence right now of a Catholic state which is corrupt and is devoted to the heart of Jesus. And in the Truth Commission, this is very painful for us. The church in Colombia has blessed the army. It is the army of false positives. What is this? Well, we have been able to show in the peace system of the Truth Commission, we have been able to show that our Catholic army is a Catholic diocese, has murdered between 6,000 and 7,000 youth, innocent, that were taken from poor sectors, from the peasant communities. They were murdered, unarmed. So this was done by the Catholic army. And they were shown as members of the guerrilla that died in combat to be able to further promote themselves within their own army. And this was done in a terrible way. And this was done by all the different sectors of the Colombian army. So we have specific captains within this diocese that was created within the army. And years ago in Colombia, there was the political orientation was going to be done by Catholic politicians, Catholic businessmen, and the army had nothing to say about this. And this was defended by the army, the order that was established by them. And the army was carrying out a just war to protect Catholics and Christians. And this is how we created one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And the monopoly of cocaine in the world, and everything was legitimized by our Catholic army, Catholic dioceses. It was a terrible situation. Everything was produced and created in a very complicated and through a very dark system, and very much away from what should be to follow Jesus. And this is something that we have seen also in the Truth Commission, the difficulty to acknowledge that we made mistakes of just speaking the truth, that we were wrong. And the guerrilla has acknowledged their responsibility, the paramilitary also, some members of the army also, some of those that perpetrated these murders, they came to the Truth Commission and they have talked about it. But our church as such has not acknowledged publicly its responsibility as a whole, and neither has the Colombian army has acknowledged these mistakes. Uh, well, victims went to the Havana and they explained in depth, in very clear sign of non-violence. They expressed the suffering of the families and victims in while their own bodies are give testimony of what has happened. Some of them without legs, other blinded women that were raped, and we see they were showing themselves and showing how terrible it was, and how we had as Colombians self-destroyed. And we are also able to look at each other in the eyes again and to really show the path for reconciliation. There are also important spiritual roots that we have in Colombia. And this is what we also want to offer and propose to create a different country. What we want is first, or the first step will have to be to acknowledge the truth. So what can the church do? Well, it needs to be there defending men, women, nature, without any commitment to protect the status quo or to protect the power. So we really need to be a church of public ethics and to clearly prepare to, through an active nonviolence, put an end to all this. So a church needs to go away from the security of the arms, and it needs to go away from protecting power and money. A church that acknowledges its responsibilities, actions, or a mission. Also, all those false positives, all those young people that were innocent and that were murdered. And we need to say that we are sorry for this. So we need a church that needs to acknowledge its responsibility. All of us, also bishops and priests, in this tragedy of Colombia, of all these deaths, and a church that is not afraid of the truth, and to acknowledge that we're men and women and that we are often wrong and we make mistakes, and the solution is not putting a pressure on the others. No, help them, and help them also to raise again. And we also need to protect all human beings without arms, without violence, with the heart. Behind the armed confrontation that we see in Colombia and in other countries, we see there is inequality. And this is the inequality that we have in Colombia. And we also have the destruction of the environment, and also the destruction of the Pacific, of our forests, and of the indigenous people that are protecting this environment. And everything is being defended by the arms of all the armies of by weapons and by violence. And we need a church here in Colombia that needs to go against what is being happened of all the children soldiers by the guerrilla of the paramilitary. So we need to put an end to this, and the church needs to help also. And I don't know if you might remember, some years ago, one of the important governors in Colombia, passionate of nonviolence, they organized a nonviolence march to go to Caicedo. And halfway down their path, the guerrilla was there. So they just showed they had no weapons, and they just invited the guerrilla to join them, because it was a town that had been destroyed 3 times through the guerrilla. But the guerrilla members didn't listen to them. While they were imprisoned, and after 14 months in their hands, they were murdered. And some months ago, we started this march again with people from the church, and we also invited the FARC members to join us. And we went to this town, and there they did acknowledge the wrong they had done and how they had murdered innocent people. And they said there at that town that they were sorry. In the Caicedo town, well, now they want to be an example of nonviolence, because they have been able also to pardon and forgive. And well, I would like to thank you, all of you present, all of those that are listening to us, and all of us as Christians, as Catholics. We want our church to follow the path of nonviolence. You have opened the way now. You have set a very ambitious goal, and you need to help us to make sure that this becomes a reality in Latin America and all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco, Father Deru. You have helped us to understand that to move nonviolence to the center of Catholic thought on war and violence is not going to be an easy task, that it is a long journey, and that in each situation, Colombia is a deep illustration of that, that in each situation, the complexities and challenges are unique. And yet you also are showing us in Colombia that there are glimmers of hope on the horizon, that there are always, in even very difficult situations, those who are pursuing a new way, another paradigm. So thank you very much. Martha Inez?
Y muchísimas gracias, Pacho, como le decimos cariñosamente.
Thank you very much, Pacho, as we very fondly name you. It has been wonderful to listen to your reflections. It is a huge challenge that we have right now in Colombia, and we need to change the way we think about things, the way we want to resolve also conflicts, to put an end to violence. But we also need to set the basis for a new society, and there we need to really promote integral human development through peace. And we will have the possibility for a little bit of debate, a new conversation with our different guests, but that will be a second part. Now we continue with Petro. Pietro is Mexican, well, of adoption. He was actually born in Uruguay. He's a historian of the UNAM, and he's also a social activist regarding non-violent civil resistance, different social movements. He has been a defender of civil rights and activist for peace, professor of the La Salle University in Cuernavaca, and he has presented important work on peace in international fora. He has been author of Gandhi and Civic Disobedience, which is a very important book, and he's also a member of the Latin American Council for the Research on Peace. He has also defended different people that promote development and peace in Latin America, and he also belongs to Pensar en Voz Alta group. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you for accepting our invitation, also a member of the process that has led to the book. And in general, we are starting from the methodology of posing a question to all of you. And well, the question would be the following. So your efforts to impose the principle and the practices of non-violence as opposed to traditional ideas of just war and violence going in your countries and in Latin America and the Caribbean, how are these efforts doing? And for Pietro specifically, we would like to ask him about his experience in the context of generalized violence in Mexico. How could we further contribute to the important work of the civil society of non-violence resistance? And what would we still require to have people or more people that are committed, the leadership also of the people of God? Thank you. You have the floor now. Please, microphone. Your microphone is muted, Pietro.
Gracias a ti, Marta, y a
Thank you, Martha, Judith, Marie, Father Francisco, Eva, all of you that I have the chance of knowing. I wanted to say that I appreciate this moment very much, and I will try to tell you about my very humble experience. Humble but real. In Mexico, many people consider me as a social activist. I've participated in numerous conflicts of direct action, and I am also part of the academia. I train the young people, especially in non-violence training and peace building procedures. I will try to follow the same reflection of Father Francisco that I had the chance to get to know in Rome a few years ago. Because there are three ideas that are very much applicable to Mexico. Mexico and Colombia are, without any doubt, those countries that have suffered the highest intensity of wars and conflict in Latin America. They have different characteristics, but they also share some common points. The ecclesiastic hierarchy finds different parallelisms. In Mexico, society being very traditional, there is not a direct relationship with the armed forces. So the situation is different from Colombia. I was in June in Colombia in the SOS Colombia mission in the Magdalena's area in Barca Bermeja. So I've got in my mind very fresh souvenirs of what Father Francisco told us. His stories get a lot into our heart. They tell us about people that were courageous enough to show resistance in Colombia between April and June. I organized workshops about nonviolence with the young people in Barranca Bermeja, and this was a brutal experience of learning. It was a very humble experience because we really don't know too much how to go on about things. Like Father Francisco said, please help us. But there is a lot of radicalization, and the youth show us the path in an unexpected way. This was a very, very important experience for me, the direct action and no violence in Mexico. Father Francisco and Marta, actually, when you introduced Father Francisco, you used a word that reminded me of a big master in nonviolence in Mexico, Father Donald Hessler. And you mentioned a book from the Rooks called The Audacity of Peace or something like that. And Father Donald insisted that the two most important factors of nonviolence are audacity and humbleness. And I have a lot of experience in my life. These are two basic ingredients of those of us working in nonviolence. From culture, from direct action, Donald established a link with what the Virgin of Guadalupe asked Juan Diego: be humble and be courageous. And the Catholic Initiative for Nonviolence has those two ingredients. It has a somewhat humble profile, which is at the same time very courageous, because it is very courageous to think that the Pope is going to prepare an encyclical on nonviolence. It seems to be a utopia, but it will become reality at some point. Father Donald had a very powerful idea that guided us in the way. Nonviolence is the most violent of violences, but it doesn't use weapons to want to destroy the enemy. They are looking for a change. And I have seen this throughout my life. When you are facing soldiers, armed forces, they would like us to insult them, to attack them. But if we stare at them, if we look them into their eyes, this is more violent than the insults and the fight. So this not violent action breaks the enemy in a way. It stabilizes them and it helps us to disobey the non-human norms. For us, this is the big and important training, the due disobedience to all order that makes us unhuman. This is what we teach in our training and in our action. And in this sense, the testimonies of Father Francisco with the march, with his new intention of the church, I think these are very good ways and examples to disobey one of the most inhuman orders of social order, which is making non-violence a norm. And this is very important when we discuss non-violence. I've been working for 35 years with these topics and in Mexico, and there is hardly anything written in Spanish or for Latin American origins. There are practices, but nothing written, even less from the church. So this book in Mexico, well, perhaps Colombia is a country that has the highest number of resources, but we in Mexico loan everything from Colombia or from Spain. And now we have this book that has been built through a very enriching equalitarian process. And actually, I met two extraordinary women together with Judy, and I had an amazing experience from the nonviolence practice. This book represents an original material, and this is very important for those of us who are involved in the issue. We can borrow and lend this material to the communities, but before going to the analysis of this fight and the role of the church, we have to remind that there is an association between nonviolence and fair peace. And this is very appropriate because there are many avenues towards peace. Nonviolence is only one of them. We need to have this clear in our minds so as not to confuse ourselves. And this idea of just and fair peace deals with an important fundamental aspect of nonviolence. This is something that changes the life of people, the relationship between the purpose and the means used to get that purpose. This is very essential. We need to humanize the enemy, disobey unjust norms and orders, and the fact that the purpose, the aim doesn't justify the means. Gandhi said that that relationship between the means and the end is something similar to the relationship between a seed and a tree. From a rotten seed, we can't have a good, healthy growing tree. This fair war is based on the principle that the end justifies the means. So we can use bombs and weapons to reach peace, but this is only going to create more violence and destruction. That is why it is so important to remember the very title of the book that associates this idea of fair peace with the idea of nonviolence, the idea between the means to achieve an end, a purpose. Mexico is a country that has suffered many different situations of war, conflict, and what we can call a peaceful civil resistance. The word nonviolence is not very well known in Mexico, and personally, I don't use it very much because it can be misinterpreted. And it creates a lot of background noise and confusion among people. The word used is, well, the expression peaceful resistance. And we have many examples and experiences of civil peaceful resistance, especially in indigenous communities, in peasants communities that are resisting within their territories. They share a Christian faith, and for them, this book is going to be very useful. And the relatives of the disappeared people are also very important. The families, the relatives, and I would like to remember the Rue's words when he was saying how the church organizes services in places that are accepting those actions of violence, massacres with the so-called false positives. In the logic of non-violence, suspending a mass is something called as non-cooperation. And this is a fundamental value that was very much used by Gandhi. And together with civil disobedience, these two are very important types of action where the church can also act upon. I think we need to recuperate. We need to remember the church doesn't have to normalize or standardize what the powers do. It needs to go beyond. And if it's needed, then we need to disobey the ruling powers. So suspending a mass is also a way of not cooperating with the powers of war. We need to recuperate this prophetic role of church. The relatives in Mexico tried to moved to the clandestinity. In Morelos, in the state where I live, I spent 1 month digging clandestine tombs in the so-called national brigades. So they decided to stop cooperating with the impunity of the government. They realized after 3 years of fighting that the government was never going to look for the relatives. They weren't going to help them in that task. That's why they decided to do a sort of non-cooperation and to take upon their own hands the search of their disappeared relatives. And they did that without asking for permission. This is something fundamental for those of us involved in social fight and non-violence. The very idea of asking for permission to authorities and the opposition to this idea of doing independent actions, autonomous actions. It doesn't mean to be against them, but you go a bit in parallel in an autonomous manner on yourself. And in Mexico, there are thousands of dead bodies that have been found and tens of thousands of bones. Now we have a huge forensic work to do because we are lacking an easy structure to identify the bones from the forensic perspective. So there is a double victimization. We have the dead body, but we don't know who they belong to. And this is tragic and terrible. Finally, a very quick idea. It is very important to remember the hierarchy in the church, because the hierarchical church or hierarchy in church is a non-violent weapon called moral reserve. All societies have to possess this reserve, and due to the Latin American history, the Catholic Church is part of this moral reserve, but not the only one. The academia, the intellectuals also know about this, and this moral reserve of the church in Mexico hasn't taken to the streets. They haven't participated in actions that are proportionate to violence, non-cooperation actions, or even civil disobedience with the relatives of victims. We need to understand that there is a spiral here of violence, of war, and it goes in parallel with a non-violence spiral. We need to know the non-violence spiral because this needs to be in proportion. They need to be proportionate. If I believe that the relatives of the disappeared ones are going to disappear because I do a conference press, this is not moral because there is no association. It is not a link between these two factors. The big problem of the non-prophetic church, because by the way, the basic church is wonderful. It is filled with commitments, but it is not always part of this moral reserve in a conflict society as the one in Mexico. The types of actions are very mild and are not proportionate to the actions in the spiral of war. So that we have this gap, and this is a moral reserve that we need to have from the life of Jesus. We need to understand how the church needs to increase their non-violence actions in a public sphere, not in a private sphere. Perhaps I leave this here, otherwise I take too much of your time, and I apologize if I have taken a lot of your time.
Thank you very much, Pietro. That was your ideas, and your presentation was extraordinary, as was Father de Ruz. I think we are all listening very carefully and learning from the experience of Mexico, as in Colombia, and this whole notion of moral reserve, of what the church could and should be doing in the public arena in a way I think is challenging for all of us, as is the notion of, if you will, waging nonviolent conflict, that nonviolence is a powerful tool that enables us not to sit back and accept the unjust or violent reality, but to, if you will, roll up our sleeves and engage in very concrete and specific ways. From I thank you for reminding us of Father Don Hessler's deep thinking and the notion of audacity and humility as essential components of nonviolent action is important for us to remember. And thank you as well for your note that this book, this little book that was produced from such a rich process, can be helpful in Mexico in a context where more resources are useful. So thank you very much, Pietro. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Pietro. Ha sido muy productiva.
Thank you so much, Pietro. This has been a very enriching conversation. I would like to send special greetings to Dr. Eva Reyes Casitua. She has a PhD on theology by the University of Chile, Magister in Theology by the Catholic University of Chile, and a bachelor's degree as well by that university, a degree in education, teacher of religion in Las Cañas University. She's doing a PhD on philosophy at the Catholic University of Argentina. She's also teaching in the Catholic Northern University of Chile, and she has several publications. She's a member of the International Association of the IEP, member of the ALALITE, Latin American Association of Literature and Theology, and member of the Interdisciplinary Research Center Edith Stein of the Catholic University in Chile. She has conducted dialogue at the level of topics of faith and culture. She has ventured from theology in connection with the fields of literature, philosophy, sciences of religion, mysticism, medieval studies, and education. She's also a lay missionary in Peru. Welcome, Eva, and thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. You have the floor. Thank you very much for you. Oh, I forgot to remind you of the question. Can you make us an analysis of the book to start with? And secondly, how did you consider that nonviolence is present in your work as a theologian? And how, from active nonviolence, can we promote a more inclusive church, a more synodal church in these times of synod and ecclesial assembly for Latin America? Thank you very much. Thank you so much, and thank you for your attention. I will try to reply to these very important questions based on the text on the book. Let me share my screen to order my thoughts.
Focusing on the first question that was posed by Marta, so it's related to analysis of the book. Well, I have been able to identify some elements that I believe are essential related to what has already been said, and also elements that we think are interesting for our own lives. So initially, we have all the different aspects that are regarding the phenomenology of nonviolence. So the phenomena of what is non-violence. The second part would be the theoretical and practical basis and fundaments of the non-violence. So what Marie was mentioning before. So this is related to the Bible. So we really see that we're focusing on the Christian roots mainly focusing on the gospel. So this is what we would focus on. Then we have the more practical issues and the power of nonviolence. This third part, this would be rather related to anthropological elements that are also linked to the incarnation. And I will explain this more in depth. And we are being invited then at the last part to adopt nonviolence as a way of life. So there I have really been able to identify specific sentences that allow us to address these elements, these general elements. So when we talk about nonviolence, how can we introduce it in our life and taking into account the mission of Jesus? So focusing greatly on the gospel. And we have this new vision based on Jesus Christ and a new way of seeing life, a new way of seeing the mission of the church. And specifically, when we're talking about Latin American countries and missionaries, nonviolence is a way of life. This is what is being highlighted in different ways in the text, is a specific type of spirituality. And I have worked on mysticism. So when we're talking about spirituality and mysticism, we're also talking about a way of being. And it also invited us to really contemplate the beauty. So when we contemplate beauty, we will also be able to be aware when something is catastrophic. This will allow us to prevent and put an end to violence without using violence. Also in the book, we're saying that this non-violence is broader than the concept of pacifism. And this is also very important for us. So what does this mean? If we're also focusing on pacifism, and it goes against simply deciding to do no harm. It goes beyond this. So it's not only a mission either, an omission that would be maybe non-implication. What is being highlighted in the text is that nonviolence is an active force towards peace, justice, and reconciliation. Therefore, nonviolence is part of these three elements: peace, justice, and reconciliation. So it's a triad. If we try to describe the antithesis of violence. So violence, and if we take into account the different popes, Pope Francis has reminded this, violence is not only specific actions of cruelty, it implies also global systems of domination. And here I would like to highlight this idea, and Pope Francis has been remembering these elements and with keywords. We're talking about system, global systems that are dominating. And here there's also another concept that is essential. So we see domination and we also talk about power. Violence is personal, but also interpersonal. It is structural and it is systemic. Violence, therefore, is not only focusing on an element of the participation of an individual as such, but rather also is related to powerful systemic structural systems, as we were saying, and structure. So it's much broader. And we're talking about new elements that are included. And we need to focus on these different characteristics to analyze our own people, our own nations, and also neighboring countries. So when there's poverty, there's violence. Where there's racism, there is violence, gender violence, for example, feminicide, war, and also what is called the preparation of war, oppressive regimes, for example, or the destruction of our planet. Within this idea of the text in general, these keywords that we find in the text that have really been highlighted. So we're being invited to live, to promote a culture of peace. So here we also need to renew our concept of culture. Again, see and take a look at the gospel with new eyes, with this word also that is being used also in the gospel, different words, this revelation. Pope Francis has highlighted the importance of this interconnection within creation. So there's a creation, and in the creation as such, we are looking towards a future that goes through an anthropology, and at the same time it is within the process of incarnation. So again, we're talking about what does the body mean? What does it mean to attack bodies through torture, murder, and we also talk about an extended body. It's not only my body alive as an incarnated subject, but rather a subject that is also incarnated in an integral ecology. So when I move as a body, for example, this is not limited to me as an individual, but rather it is extended towards the world. My body, again, is an extended body. And again, for Pope Francis, this means that in some way we need to invite to an interreligious cooperation. Nonviolence is not only an issue for Catholics or for Christians, it is clearly a call to all for interreligious cooperation. As we said before, we're talking about a way of life, a way of living. Again, we're talking about a specific culture. How can we prepare ourselves so that nonviolence, it's something that is being promoted daily with the children, the youth, with a specific force, as we can see in the gospel through mysticism, where we're able to admire beauty, contemplate also the words, and we are able then to have and to share this positive power. So we also have a constructive focus and at the same time a spiritual discipline. Again, we have mystic concept that is related to discipline, and at the same time each and everyone, and as individual, also as a church, we see that the people of God, again, needs to be something together, walking to construct, to build. It doesn't just come magically. It's something we need to work on. So it is something we receive. It is clearly a gift, but at the same time, it's a task. So as a theologian, as women also, I like to establish these elements between nonviolence and theology. So here we have a painting of Marc Chagall, a Belarusian painter, and there we have a synonym with Picasso, the Guernica, and here it is the horror of war, the suffering of people, of their bodies. We see forced migration, they're fleeing, and the pain inflicted by death. And here we clearly, or I clearly have a specific vocation, a feminine point of view, and it opens to Christian hope. And I was remembering a very important element, the kava concept in Hebrew, which means bring together, unite. And again, I was being taken back to another image. I'm going to see if I can show you. So here we have, here in this corner, we have someone that is, I don't know if you can see it, it's right next to the cross. I'm going to try to show it to you. I'm trying to zoom it. Here we have the cross, Jesus crucified, and we see that someone desperate is clinging on to the cross, to the feet of the cross, so that the cross doesn't go away. So this is provoking us as theologians. We are really seeing that this is reaching us, and it comes from this process in which we are listening, and we're trying to promote Christian hope from the Kaaba. And there we see that this has consequences because there are responsibilities, also political, social, and there's a theological dynamic also in Latin America. For us as theologians, God with us is an important event. And I go on to Marta's question on how to promote the idea of non-violence in this path that we have of synodality in times of the synod, and the call that we have of Pope Francis regarding the church and regarding the church's mission. So we see that the church has been conceived as a people of God. So we're all walking together and marching together, and this is closely related to the synod. It means all of us together, we are creating, or we are a communion. We are a being of communion that is being manifested and realized in this idea of relation. And at the same time, this invites us to take a look at the Trinity, and Trinity is a relation. It's a clear relationship, and at the same time, it invites for a participation of the whole people of God in life and in the mission of the church. The mission of the church and the life of the church is not limited to the intellectuals or to a hierarchy. No, it's the people as a whole, people walking together and being transformed through a mission. All the members of the church as active subjects for evangelization, and we clearly see there the gospel, and we see the kingdom of God again related with the spirituality of walking together in non-violence. It is created therefore as a conversion, as us as Christians, metanoia. So we truly need a change in our life to live a renewed synod. This means therefore that there are challenges, and one of the first challenges is to listen. When we listen to God calling us, we will immediately have an answer. The people of God, again, that is being shown in this interconnection with the church as synod, is going to be essential. And or church, where there's a hierarchy, there also needs to be a clear process to listen, to carefully listen. And then we see there the Christian spirit is being manifested, and all this needs to be closely linked, and we link it to the general idea that fundamentally non-violence is justice, and justice requires this idea of looking again at the words of the gospel, and also in the Bible, in the Old Testament, justice. The God of the Old Testament is a God that is just, but it's not a distributive justice, our own justice. It's rather a justice that is accompanied by another word, rahamin in Hebrew. which derives of a Hebrew word that means the uterus. So we're talking about a God that is father and mother, that at the same time, through a uterus, contains the whole people of God and is inviting us to live together in communion. So this is another idea we can continue highlighting to continue looking through the text, a renewed synod, Christology, also the incarnation that has been present in previous reflections, of course. This invites us to look in a retrospective way, the way the church has been, this vocation that we all are invited to realize. So thank you again for listening to me and to this presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. That was beautiful. It was extraordinary. And there were so many concepts that you presented that we need to go back and treasure and develop in our own thinking. The whole idea of the synod, of synodality, is so closely tied to the communion that you referred to the recognition of the need for healed relationships, both within the church and in society. And your use of art was really beautiful. Thank you so much. We have just a little bit of time now to encourage and invite some conversation among those of you who have shared your thoughts this morning, Father Francisco, Pietro, and Dr. Eva. We would invite each of you to add a thought, add a comment if you'd like, ask each other questions for a few minutes, whatever deepening of this conversation is possible in just a few minutes. So maybe going back to you, Father Francisco, just your thoughts after listening to Pietro and Eva.
And Marie, just to notice that Bishop Stanger has his hand raised.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mary. No, muy brevemente, realmente muchísimas gracias, mis queridos amigos, Pietro.
Very briefly, just wanted to thank you very much, my dear friends. Pietro, I very much liked your mention of audacity and humbleness.
Esta llamada en contra de la normalización, pero sobre todo
this call against normalization, I like that. And also the emphasis you put in the non-cooperation. A mass to the members of the army that are really false positives. And this is a specific example, the concept of the hierarchical church as moral reserve, the totality of the Christian people as an entity. They are hierarchical reserve, where we find sometimes the answer to the spiral of violence. It has to have the same status, to represent the same volume and level of implication. In Colombia, more than 100,000 people disappeared. You can't reply with a document. You need to do a mobilizing public action of all the people involved. So I found that very valuable. So when you invite us as Christian people, as hierarchical church to unite us, and you have made us understand how nonviolence is peace, justice, and reconciliation. It touched my heart, also the feminine reference in the way that you look at things from a very deep point of view, from a very deep perspective. and relying on hope and responsibility and this spirituality. Listening to God's message. He's asking us to go on this type of non-violent action. I feel that we are far away. The Christian Europe was very violent in the past century. It was the territory of the most horrendous wars. But the Christian Europe is destroying the planet today, and we, Latin America, are the most violent continent in the planet. What do we do with Christianity? I am in the Commission of Truth, and we are parts of an entity, of a ruling entity, where the darkness of minds is prevailing. This is very ugly. I feel this at the Commission of Truth. There is not an awareness of responsibility or accountability, neither individual nor collective, but we have a constant need to self-justify ourselves, to legitimate absolutely everything. We need to, yes, we want to justify everything we do, even violence, if need be. And as Eva was saying, I feel that resistance. I see those obstacles, those hurdles to this truth of nonviolence. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to interrupt and invite Bishop Stanger, who has his hand raised virtually, to please step in with a comment or a question. Bishop Stanger.
Muchas gracias por la reflexión de.
Thank you very much for your reflections. I have a question. I remember when I met Father Dou in Barranca Bermeja at a particular time when things were very violent. The disappearance of a Christian leader, Omar, I remember his name.
Entendido questa ocasión que el sistema
And on that occasion, I understood that the system is encouraging a climate of fear.
Mi pregunta es,
my question is, how can we resist this climate of fear?
Perdón. ¿Cómo resistir al clima?
Yes, how can we resist this climate of fear when the dearest things are threatened, such as your family, your home, your work, your livelihood is put at stake? How can people resist? We need defenders to help us in this resistance movement. People need to find support in solid bases.
Es posible de dar un poco más de consistencia a un momento de resistencia,
We need to give more coherence to this resistance moment, this moment of non-acceptance of violence. So this was one of my questions. I remember that the system supported itself on a threat.
Contestar.
And people were scared. Thank you very much. I apologize for my Spanish, says Bishop Stenger. Father Duro, I'm very, very happy to see you again. I have the impression that we shared common fights in Barranca Bermeja when we helped the family of Omars. And I remember the time when we were blocked at the airport. And the organizers had told you, here is Omar. And we had to accept their ideas. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for your words, for those beautiful souvenirs. But I would like to ask Pietro to reply. He also was very recently in Barranca Bermeja.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you, Bishop Mark. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but Pietro or Dr. Eva, would you like just a few words to round this off? There's so much more that we need to talk about and explore together and learn from each other.
Mari, yo creo que podríamos
Pietro,
tomar
and then
15 minutos más.
5 minutos.
No, no se
Tenemos
preocupen.
5
Yo creo que
minutos.
podríamos ir
Yes,
un poquito
Pietro.
más.
Don't worry.
Un poquito más, sí. Yo creo
Bueno,
que somos...
Do we have more time? A bit more, yes. Okay, I will speak quite fast. I will try not to be excessively telegrammatic. I think that Father Francisco and me had some kind of telepathy because we worked in the nonviolence workshop. We discussed fear and terror. For us, the big challenge that the youth are facing is that they are fearsome, but they can't be terrorized. You can be fearsome, but you don't have to be terrorized. You have to distinguish between these two concepts because you need fear to fight better. Fear can be a defense. Somebody who lives in Mexico, if they are not fearing anything, they will be irresponsible people. The important thing is to defeat terror because terror paralyzes you and doesn't allow you to reflect. This is a very important factor in a non-violent action. You can't go from fear to terror because at that point you can't fight properly. Father talked about the darkness of consciousness. This is very important because sometimes we feel overwhelmed by terrible realities such as war, climate change, etc. And this book is going to help us never lose hope. Non-violence has a lot to do with small actions based on hope. Yesterday, there was a wonderful action in Chile based on hope. We had a similar one in Bolivia last year and in Mexico in 2028. I hope we will have something similar in Brazil next year. For us, it is very important to be able to build actions of hope. bigger or smaller. Father Ruth talked about humbleness. We don't have to kneel down on our knees. I don't have to feel inferior by being humble. Being humble means that you carry out actions when you realize that they are possible because people will understand them and they will be feasible. And sometimes they might appear to be very small, but they will have a very big impact. I will give you a very brief example. In the recent Disappeared Brigade, we created in ecumenic churches an action that was called the Letterbox for Peace. This was a very courageous and humble action organized by the church. This was framed in a campaign called I Am the Path, the Truth, and Life. This is a biblical phrase by Jesus. And during a month, in all the services, there were letterboxes and people could write anonymously maps of places where there were clandestine tombs. And this was a great help for the families. We had to do 2 brigades because there were many places mentioned. And this is an example of non-cooperation, precisely because if we were talking about cooperation, the church would be quiet, not getting involved in the disappeared phenomenon, because the narcos don't want these things to be found out. But through the religious services, you can organize these peace letterboxes. Because, as I said, Marcos don't want their mass graves to be found out. Or in Chile, there is a very big action to attack darkness, but the path is very long and winding.
Y yo quisiera indicar en esta misma...
Yes. In this same line, I would like to say that the big personalities in the Old Testament, Queen Esther, for example, Queen Esther is acting on behalf of her people, of God's people, and with her gesture, she places herself in the middle in order to intervene for everybody's sake. And I would like to establish a link between this episode and the interconnectivity, as Francis Pope says, and talking about the darkness of consciousness that can be also perceived as ignorance, or disrespectful attitude when we do not see the pain in our neighbor. We need to have more empathy with people's troubles and pains. And as a theologian, I think that we as Christians look at Christ as the incarnated God, and we need to assume our human condition as Jesus did, and he had to die at the cross. When I was studying theology, fundamental theology, Antonio Ventura, my teacher, said something that I always think about. He said that God saves in the cross, at the cross. He saves us from the cross as well. So evil can't be perceived as something that you need to endure. Much to the contrary, there's a theological idea of the meaning of what we are from an anthropological point of view, what we are as men and women, that moves us towards an action through which we can show in some way or another the presence of a good, beautiful God that gives us hope. And this is reality check for ourselves, and we always need to be alert and reflect more deeply.
Thank you so much, Eva. What a beautiful place to pause at this moment as we complete the last days of Advent and move toward that inbreaking of the presence of God with us again, a time of hope that we hold on to dearly. Martinez, I think we are just about out of time.
Sí, muchísimas gracias a Eva, a Pacho, a Pietro.
Yes, thank you very much, Eva, Pacho, Pietro, Marie, Mark, for this wonderful webinar. This has been a blessing because we have had a very hard year for many of us. This has been a challenge in terms of building a culture of peace and non-violence. Pacho mentioned that violence has been harder with the most vulnerable ones. That's why the church has to support them. But as such, we as Christians, we have failed in our attempt to show compassion. And Peter said, not everything is valid. We need to make this moral reserve prevail. We need to have proportionate actions of non-cooperation, not asking for permission, and act following our ethic and our moral reserve. And this has been shown in public. Eva made a wonderful revision of the book. Thank you very much. And she mentions the fact that we have a personal non-violence, but a relational or a structural non-violence. We see gender-based violence. These are types of actions that move us to act from the non-violence to repel such terrible actions. And we don't have to put man in the center. We have to think about the planet, Mother Earth. We have worked on these topics in the Latin American church, the challenge of listening. When we are really listening to the church as God's people, we can identify sufferings, obstacles. 4 main ideas as a mean of conclusions. I'm sure there will be many more. And these are going to help us in our future work with the groups. We're going to circulate these ideas. First, we need to build an awareness of recognition. We need to leave darkness behind, leave ignorance and apathy, because this is being an accomplice. Secondly, there are obstacles that we need to overcome to the clarification of truth. These are not small obstacles, they are big. So we need to develop small actions that can produce big change, that give us a sign of hope. And finally, being fearsome doesn't have to be bad because it moves us into action, but we can't be terrorized, otherwise we will be paralyzed. Thank you so much, Enid, for your participation. This has been an amazing session, a very interesting webinar that is giving us a lot of food for thought and work. Apart from disseminating the content of this book, it is important that we continue on this path. So this is one of my recommendations for the steering committee group of CNI. How can we make a more popular version of this book for Latin American and the Caribbean? We are going to do this, no doubt at all. Thank you once again. I send you a big hug in this Advent time, and let's continue together in our path. Thank you.